I did not repeat the title of today's episode, and I gotta admit, I was grooving, cutting a jig to old Johnny Taylor's last $2, just can't lose. I lost my train of thought. And as I said, the title of today's episode is Coon Song Genre, Down Home Blues to Spiritual Jubilees, the antecedents to United States rap cultures. The antecedents meaning the precursor to what was non-white people, in particular people subject to black classification, doing in creative arts, in spoken word, in poetry, in songwriting, in film production. What were we doing? In screenwriting. What were we doing in screenplays? What were we doing in short stories? What was our inspiration? What was our seasoning? What was the soul? What was the flavor that we put into our creative force, our creativity? What were we doing? That's the question. We weren't just sitting twiddling our thumbs, not creating, as we understand here in these United States of America. Wheresoever you see anything that has been made and is native to this nation, 9 times out of 10, it derived from the foundation of it was the creative capital of non-white people, in particular, non-white people subject to black classification. Now, that's either true or it's not true. That is why we're doing this episode right now. Old John G is from the southern region of the United States. Old John G is from what they call the Black Belt. Old John G is from what they also call the Bible Belt. You understand me? Old John G was raised by people who frequented, who spit money in, who were patrons of the Chitlin Circuit. Yes, indeed, the old Chitlin Circuit. You understand me? And we understand the Chitlin Circuit to be directly related to vaudeville and blackface minstrelsy, although the Chitlin Circuit were exclusive at one time to only non-white people subject to black classification. And in those environments, all this creativity based upon the caricatures that were beat down, driven into the mindset and the psyche of non-white people, in particular people subject to black classification around the globe and in the South. These creative caricatures, characters, monikers, bits, songs, rhymes, poets, short stories, screenplays were created by non-white people, in particular black people, people subject to black classification. And we unwittingly accept these creatures and these essences from this toxic environment that we would call anti-black pop culture. We accept that as our culture, and within this acceptance, we put seasoning on it, just like soul food. Let me take my time with this, fellow black classifieds. Soul food would be considered, what would that be considered? Some would say soul food would be the stuff that was made into delicacies that we were fed on the plantation. What were we fed on the plantation? We were, as I understand it, given the stuff that people who classify themselves as white didn't want. Mostly the pig. Now, I would argue, and most people who understand history would argue that, but the pig would be considered to be an unhealthy animal. Because what does the pig eat? Any and everything he can get his hands, mouths on, as I understand it. And the pig is not anything that you would feed yourself if you know anything about consumption. Now, I'm not going to get into health and all that, but now, they would take pig intestines, not they, the ancestors would take pig intestines, and if anybody have smelled pigs, period, you can imagine what the intestines smell like. Now, I come from a household that anything that was caught was put up in the oven, because I was raised by a grandmother a sweet queen grandmother, Grandma Rose, who come from rural survivors subject to black classification in the South. And the ancestors, you understand me, for all intents and purposes, whatever you caught is what you ate. Now, ain't no shame in that. That's called surviving. You understand me? Now, one would have you think that it is shameful to come from humble country beginnings, especially with the anti-black pop culture that has been pounded in our psyches for at least 100 plus years. Now, where does this come from? I'll try to take a swing at it. Now, as I understand it, one of the things that non-white people subject to black classification could do during antebellum slavery and Reconstruction, one of the lucrative entrepreneurial businesses that non-white people, in particular, people subject to black classification, could have for themselves was actually getting crops of their own and just having a little side business on top of whatever they had to do day in, day out on the Terror Squad plantation and or day in, day out on the sharecropping situation that they may have found themselves in. Now, one thing you could do is have a little side hustle. And those side hustles most likely would be growing potatoes, pumpkins, greens, tomatoes, onions, you know, and in particular, oranges, apples, and watermelons. Oh, and watermelon was a delicacy then, and it's a delicacy now. You know, a lot of non-white people, in particular people subject to black classification, got themselves up out of terroristic positions by making a lot of money selling watermelons. Now, people who classify themselves as white would see watermelon farmers subject to black classification getting paper, for the lack of a better term. So they went on a anti-black jihad to shame watermelons, and in particular, make fun of black people who were wealthy and or had respectable resources based upon selling watermelons. And every time you turn around on a movie, on a poster, in a vaudeville act, in a blackface minstrelsy act, you'll have white folks making fun of watermelons and black people. Now, how you make non-white people, particularly black people, shameful of watermelon? And what is the science behind that? You understand me? The science is part of domination in this system, as I understand it, is deception. And part of deception is to have non-white people, in particular people subject to black classification, confused. Those who were making plenty money off of watermelon started to see a decline in their sales. Because black people, I don't want to be seen with no watermelons. You understand me? And you just get you behind, you know, as the survivors that we were and still are, you just go into another business, sell greens or oranges or apples or peaches, something, but the watermelon wasn't as lucrative. Let me tell you something, but it's still lucrative. Guess who's making that money? Those people who are classified as white. Joke's on you. Made you ashamed of it. They go into the business that they see that you making the paper off of, and now they dominate the business. And let me tell you, still to this day, I bet non-white people, in particular, people subject to black classification, still look over their shoulders when they biting into some succulent watermelon. Now that's either true or it's not true. Let's move on.